As the world continues to contend with the COVID-19 pandemic, trade has become central to ending global poverty, and it has also been observed that countries that are open to international trade grow faster, innovate, improve productivity, and also get to provide higher income and more opportunities to their people. Open trade also benefits lower income households by offering consumers with more affordable goods and services. Therefore, the importance and efficacy of international or trade cannot be underemphasized as it plays a central role in the tackling of the global challenge of poverty, which has been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic that obviously is and will be with us for a long time. The name is Winston Mavora, and you're watching Bizweek. And tonight we will be delving into the importance of trade in national development. My guest this evening is joining me all the way from Berlin, Germany, and this is Dr. Jan Seneki. And of course, we'll be providing perspectives on what trade, can do to be able to uplift not only the overall agenda of national development, but at the same time to be able to address challenges such as poverty. And of course, we know that there's a lot that is happening when it comes to trade, as African countries at the moment are also in talks and working towards making some strides that will consolidate trade at continental level. Good evening, Dr. Seneki.
Yes, good evening, Winston, and thanks for having me tonight.
Very, very much okay, Doc. Thank you for joining me this evening on Bizwick.
Yes, I'm very glad to be here.
All right. So, Doc, first things first. Zambia is at the moment, under the Vision 2030, pursuing a national prosperity and, of course, status of a middle income nation. How important is trade when we talk about, achieving such an aspiration?
I mean, trade is always an important aspect in economic development, but it also should not be taken as the single aspect that can move countries into better development. So it's always a set of issues that need to be considered. Um, Trade should be important because, as you said in your opening remarks, there are only a few countries. I think there's even no country that has had remarkable growth in the last decades without being open to trade. But still, of course, you need things like skills of the people, like infrastructure, and also like rule of law and absence of corruption to drive development. All these things are interconnected, and you cannot have one without the other. So I think it's always important to think in a connected way, in a holistic way, to consider trade, but also to consider other things that are important for development.
All right, Doc. One of the things that we've noticed is that when we talk about trade, obviously, countries within the European community have actually made quite some strides when it comes to trade agreements that have stood the test of time. And Africa at the moment is, still in talks while trying to implement what we are calling the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. So I would like to find out from you, what lessons can Africa draw?
Yes, I mean, first of all, I think the most important lesson is not to try to copy things from Europe to African nations or any other region in the world. This will just not work. Of course, you can learn from certain aspects, but first of all, you always have pros and cons in a free trade arrangement, and there are always winners and losers. And the structure is, of course, always difficult. So I would expect that if you would have a free trade arrangement between, say, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and South Africa, you have different issues between these countries than you would have in Europe. So it's always important to start from where you are. And a second point, very important, if you look at the European Union, is when it was founded, at least. It was a club of nations that had very similar understandings of how to run their countries and how to run their economies. So it was, and it still largely is, a grouping of democratic countries that believe in a market economy. And the problem is that EU has at the moment is that some countries like Hungary or Poland don't expect it or don't accept it anymore. and that brings even the EU to issues and trouble. So I think it's important to learn that when you want to start some deep and meaningful integration of countries, they need to have similarities. Yeah, you can't have a dictatorship and a democracy coming together. It will just not work out. That's, I think, an important thing to learn. And then, of course, it's good to have ambitions and to dare to go somewhere where you think maybe it's a bit dangerous and tricky, but to take a step and to think we do it now. Maybe it's not perfect, but it could work. Is something that Europe did all the time. Yeah? The European integration was never a perfect thing. It always was compromises and something that just had been done, and then we found out how to do it. So also, I think it's good to dare doing something and not to wait until the chance is over.
Looking at the role of trade in national development, my guest is Dr. Jan Seneki, joining me from Berlin, who is senior advisor international economy and trade at the Konrad Adenauer Foundation in Germany, Berlin. Now, Doc, you've mentioned something very, very important about Africa really not doing a copy and paste kind of approach to ensuring that the African Continental Free Trade Agreement succeeds. I'll bring it at the Zambian level, where we've seen some of the regional trade agreements that Zambia is a part of, such as the SADC, such as the COMESA. These agreements have not really performed very well, and I just wanted to know, is it possible to build a successful continental trade agreement in the midst of regional trade agreements that are not seemingly doing very well?
Yeah, to be honest, it's surely difficult. Huh? And we've seen it with the African Continental Free Trade Area that a striking thing happened, that most countries of the African continent did formally ratify the AFCFTA. And so you should expect from the outset that it's working, that you could actually transport a good from the harbor of Tunis to Brazzaville without any problems, that there would be actual free trade within all these countries that participate in the AFCFTA. But it's not happening because most of the countries just did not just translate what they have signed with the treaty of AFCFTA into local law. That means that for example, if you wanted to lower tariffs on certain goods and you signed it on the treaty, it's not done in the local law, so it doesn't work. And of course, I wonder why this happens. So why do governments sign a treaty and depose the instruments of ratification in Addis, but then don't do the job locally and implement the thing? And that's, of course, a costly thing because it destroys lots of confidence that actually has been there in Europe and in America, that now it could be possible to trade with a big African free trade area, and then companies from Europe come in and say, let's use it, and then they find out it doesn't work. So striking that implementation, obviously in many countries just doesn't work, and I would assume that there would be some powerful interest groups that actually do not want that.
And to be able to take part in this conversation, all you simply have to do is call the numbers that are displaying on your screen right now, and you can be able to add a thought or two to this important conversation. Doc, at the moment, the agreement has made significant progress on the African continent as many nations are putting pen to paper to ensuring that they are a part of this agreement that will, expose them to the larger African continent. Now, what I'd like to find out is, Africa at the moment, Doc, obviously, when it comes to manufacturing, is not really yet there compared to Europe and maybe the West. Is it timely to be able to make this, jump, or maybe we should have waited until we industrialize properly so that we could have, say, trade leverage when it comes to other partners such as the East that are knocking on our doors from different countries trying to strike trade deals?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the AFCFTA is an African free trade area. That means that there won't be free trade within African nations. not with China or with Europe or with the US. Huh? So I think there shouldn't be too much worries about that other countries come in and kind of block the African industrialization via the African continental free trade area if it works. Huh? Of course, if corruption comes in or if some things are not respected, we talk about something different. But if the African continental free trade area would be implemented by the letter of the treaty, then it's a thing between African countries, and there shouldn't be any worries that cheap goods from other countries, not African countries, do come in. If you talk about manufacturing and about industrialization, of course, it's important to look at the two different aspects of trade. First of all, if you import goods, it brings in cheaper and often higher quality goods in every country, even in Germany. And that is good for the consumers because they can then buy cheaper goods and have more money left over for the consumption of other goods that also could be goods that you would produce in your own country. So trade is it's always good for the consumers. On the other side, you have people in your country that produce the same goods that now come in cheaper, and they would maybe lose their companies, and also people that work there may lose their jobs. And that is something to be considered, that, as I said before, you have winners and losers in trade, and you need to find a balance. So in the end, in total, it's always good to the whole country and to the complete population to open your barriers and trade barriers and to have free trade. But of course, we need to think about what happens to the people that suffer from that. That are normally fewer people, but of course you need something like a social system or other kinds of compensation to the losers of trade. And in many cases, the discussion just centers around, are we losing jobs in manufacturing? And not about, can people get cheaper daily products that they would, of course, like to have. And I think it would be good and honest to discuss both ends of it, not just to think it's dangerous to have free trade because we may lose jobs or we may not have a chance to industrialize. That is part of the truth. So of course, it needs to be thought about what can we do to our local production to not be suffocated by very powerful trade partners. But on the other hand, what about the consumers that are poor? There are many people that, of course, need to buy cheap products, and if you get them cheaper from the outside of your country, of course, you should take it for the good of the average consumer. So both of the things I would ask you to discuss and to consider.
Doc, obviously Africa at the moment, is attracting quite a lot of trading partners, not only Europe and America and China, but other far-flung places are also looking for trade opportunities because Africa, arguably is one of the most endowed continents that we have, and there's a lot that could be extrapolated from here. What I wanted to find out is where opportunities are concerned. We've heard quite a lot about what Africa can offer the world, from the Chinese, from the Europeans, and other people. But what opportunities do you think Africa can be able to look to when it comes to trade with, strategic partners such as Europe?
Trade always makes both partners richer in the end. Yeah, so it's something that not many people in front of the television would say, no, that is not true. But in the end, it is, because if you buy something from another country, you send money to them and you get a product from it back, so of the same value, so you don't lose anything. And if you buy something cheaper from another country, then you would get it from your own country. You just save money, and that happens in all transactions of trade. The reason why in many cases trade has a rather bad connotation in many African countries, and I know that because I lived in Kenya for quite some time, so it's not something I know from the books, is that many of times corruption comes in, or interests of very powerful people come in, and they kind of misuse trade just to get luxury cars, or sometimes you are getting bribes in order to give some state markets to not competitive bidders, but they just gave you money, so you do this. And that, of course, is not a good thing for the country. So we need to be very careful about that. If you talk about trade, which happens along the rules, then it's always a good thing. But if it's just misused by criminals, so that's the way to put it, then it doesn't work. And so we always need to think, first of all, is there rule of law, is there corruption, or do we have issues? And if yes, to address these issues. Secondly, if these issues don't exist, we need to make sure that trade, as I said before, will bring about winners or losers. You have more winners, but you have some losers. So to look about the balance of this. These things are important. If these things are considered in a country like Zambia, then it's a good thing to trade, for example, with Europe. I would think for the moment, Zambia would offer good raw materials that can be sold for good prices. As you know, the prices of raw materials explode at the moment, so there's lots to earn. On the other hand, I think also for the development of the Zambian industry, it would be very interesting to, for example, buy machinery in Germany or other parts of Europe, to use it and then to produce things that you could then produce in Zambia, and to have some industrialization that are, in many cases is key for development, especially among small and medium companies that need to that actually rely on easy and cheap trade relations, and also on less bureaucracy. Otherwise, I would not able to buy machinery somewhere in Europe, because it's difficult without the bureaucracy, and oftentimes only the big companies will get some value out of this. So I think it's good to look at imports from Europe and from America, also from China, from a productive side. That it's of course good to buy machinery, to buy productive equipment, and not to buy consumptive goods. I mean, if you just buy luxury cars, or I don't know, some things that are just consumed and then they're gone, it of course doesn't bring development. But if you buy capital goods like machinery, like other things that you can use to produce something, then trade is a wonderful thing that would bring about development. And this should not a thing that would lose Zambia any money.
You are still watching Bizweek with me, Wenson Mavor. This evening we are discussing the role of trade in national development, and my guest is Dr. Jan Stanecki, who is Senior Advisor, International Economy and Trade at the Konrad Adenauer Foundation in Germany, Berlin. We will be right back, and the conversation continues on trade. And remember, you can take part by simply calling the numbers that are displaying on your screen. See you shortly.
With Tonto's funeral plan, you can cover your entire family and loved ones, starting at only 30 kwacha. Yes, in times of bereavement, Tontozo gives you funeral benefits between 2,500 kwacha and 20,000 kwacha, providing instant cash and quality funeral services from Zambia's longest-standing funeral home, Ambassador St. Anne's. Yes, you can get the Tontozo group plans, which give you up to 40% discounts on all monthly contributions. Call or SMS the word Tontozo to 0974 884545, or contact us through our Facebook page and we'll call you back. Yes, you can also register at tontozo.com or visit any of our outlets. 40 years. We've been doing this for a long time. Tontozo, the comforter, brought to you by Uniteto Industries and Ambassador St. Anne's Funeral Parlor. We consider, we care.
This Monday, the 25th of October 2021, we reveal to you the official list of nominees for the Diamond TV Personality of the Year Awards. After receiving thousands of nominations from you, the viewer, we'll reveal which personalities you nominated the most for the partiers. As we build up to this prestigious night on the 20th of November 2021, catch the official revealing of nominees this Monday at 21:30 hours. Voting opens on the 26th of October 2021 through the Diamond TV Zambia website. So tune in this Monday at 21:30 hours to find out who has been nominated for the Diamond TV Personality of the Year Awards. Powered by Coca-Cola and award prizes through Spend Zambia.
the role of trade in national development. And joining me from Germany, Berlin, is Dr. Jan Seneki, who is Senior Advisor, International Economy and Trade at the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. To be able to participate in the program, all you simply have to do is call the numbers that are flashing on your screen. And those of you that are joining us via Diamond TV social media online platforms such as Diamond TV Zambia Facebook, Diamond TV social Instagram, and Mingotainment, you can be able to tender your comments on those specific platforms, and we will get to have an opportunity to look at them. Dr. Seneki, one of the things that I have noticed is that when we talk about striking a balance between coming up with an agreement and implementing the agreement, what we've seen on the African continent is a drag. And some countries will proclaim to be ready, yet others seem to still be hesitating. Yet instruments of ratification, we hear from different media outlets that signatures have been signed. So I'd like to find out from you what can be done to ensure that all countries are at the same page, and is it possible that countries can be at the same page for this agreement to begin to work, or we still need a long period of time to finalize this?
I'm not very sure, and of course I cannot look into the heads of the presidents or prime ministers that are trade ministers that are sitting at the tables there. But as I said before, you need a certain convergence of economies and also of political systems for such a big things like a continental free trade area to work. And I honestly do not see so much convergence between countries like if you compare Zambia and Togo, for example, Nigeria and Djibouti. Big differences. Huh? So of course you can. So I think it's good not to aim too high and to try to harvest the low-hanging fruits first, to try to maybe identify some goods with which trade would be possible along the lines. I would actually doubt if we can really expect that the AFCFTA would really work in the close future. And as I said before, I think it's not advisable to try to do something like a simulation, to say we have done it, we have ratified it, and then in the end, companies come, invest, try to trade in Africa and find out, oh, it doesn't work. And that would just enhance this kind of understanding that economic ventures in Africa are very difficult. So I think it's good to be honest to say maybe it doesn't work completely, but we have some small aspects, some items that we can trade. So let's start with these ones. That would be my advice. I don't know if it's big.
Dr. Seneki, on the African continent is the issue of policy consistency, which is a barrier in almost all sectors, trade inclusive. And in certain instances, similar to many jurisdictions, you discover that half the time, political ambitions, political aspirations often override policy. And I would like to know, comparing with how trade agreements have fared in Europe, how important is consolidated policy consistency to ensuring that trade is effective even at continental level through a vehicle such as the SAFTA?
Yeah, I mean, you never have real policy consistency. I mean, if you look at Europe, for example, if you remember what happened to Greece about a decade ago, the country was broke, and that happened. That just didn't follow the rules of the European common currency. Still, there was a way to kind of maneuver us out, even though the problem is not solved yet. And you also find lots of policies in Europe, also in Germany, that are just not consistent. So you should never expect that you will have a complete consistency. You do a plan, and after 10, 15 years, it's fully implemented. So I would actually advise not to plan too much, and to do the things that are in the control of the people that act. And it is often, at least the European example is, it is not that much. Because many things happen, there's the private sector, there is an external influence, then there are things like COVID that you cannot expect beforehand, and it's not in your control. So maybe it's good to accept that there's only few things that can be planned, and that it's good to look at the small things, at the local things that you see that you can control, and then to try to see what needs do we have. For example, the need of European integration basically reflected the need of the industry, that they wanted to buy inputs in other European countries. European companies always, since more than 100 years, did buy inputs in other countries. Yeah? So you cannot imagine a European car manufacturer that would just buy all the inputs for the cars in Germany. It just never happened. You always needed some special things from other parts of the world and of Europe. So the industry wanted that. They wanted the trade barriers to go down because it was in their interest to get their inputs cheaper. And also many governments wanted that because after the long wars in Europe, it was a good idea to say we come together, we integrate, because then it's more difficult to go to war against each other. So there were lots of interest that just led to small steps that brought integration further. And after a certain time, we found out, oh, we did so many small steps, now we have to formalize it. So even the European integration was not a planned thing. It just happened step by step. And afterwards, there was a roof of regulation, or a kind of treaty built on that. And I would also advise on that to, of course, you need policy consistency in a certain way. You cannot say we do A in the morning and B tomorrow. But I think it's good to be pragmatic and to not plan big things now, but to go step by step by step in a pragmatic way. I think that's the learning also from the European example.
One of the aspects that has dominated conversation on the African continent, Doug, has to do with the issue of trade imbalance. And with that comes concerns of certain countries that are less industrialized compared to others becoming dumping grounds. And I'd just like to find out, I mean, I know that you've alluded, in your submission earlier on, that obviously in trade, generally, it is a universal principle. There'll always be winners and, losers, as reality dictates. But how can a balance be stricken? How has Europe, surfed on this particular issue?
I mean, first of all, it's not that when I talk about winners and losers, it's countries that lose and countries that win. Yeah? So if you open up for free trade, every country will generally win, but you have some groups in the country that may lose, that may, for example, be the ones that are under higher competition pressure then and may lose jobs or their companies, and others win because they pay lower prices. It's something like a story that is false, but is repeated over and over again since decades, that it's a problem, a bad thing to have a negative trade balance. This taken alone is not a problem, because if you look at what trade balance means, it's that on one hand, you pay money for a good, and if you have a negative trade balance, that means that more money is sent out of your country, but that also means that more goods come into your country. They have a certain value, so that in the end balances out. I mean, everybody would understand if I would go and buy gold somewhere else. Yeah? You send money, for example, to Congo to get gold from them and get the gold back to your country. Then you have lots of gold and less cash on your accounts. I think nobody would say that Zambia would then be cheaper because there's more gold in the country. The same applies for machinery, other things. So it's not a bad thing to have a negative trade balance. The issue comes in if you, as I said before, just buy consumptive goods. I mean, if you just buy luxury cars and helicopters, that brings you to a negative trade balance. You, of course, don't produce anything with these helicopters and luxury cars. Then it's bad for the country. But if your country is on the way to develop, a developing country on its path to a middle-income country, of course you have to import things like machines. You have to construct infrastructure on these things, and that in the beginning of your industrialization, you get these things from other countries. So it's a sign of development, actually, if you have a negative trade balance. Yeah? So I would not always look at the trade balance. I would look at what is actually imported. Is it helicopters and golden watches, or is it machines? That is something to I actually don't know, but maybe the audience in Diamond TV knows what happens in Zambia and which things are imported. The second question was about the dumping ground, and here again it's the same thing. It's not bad when many things are brought in from other countries to Zambia, for example. It's the same thing. If you buy lots of quality machinery, if you buy inputs to construct cars or to buy railway lines that you need, then it's a good thing to get these things from other countries if they're good. But if corruption comes in and you buy bad machinery, or you construct railway lines that you don't need, then it becomes a bad thing, because then money is spent which doesn't come back, and you can use it. So the question always is, what do you buy? And no, not if you buy. Importing things is generally a good thing.
Doctor, countries such as Zambia, face the challenge of an equal income distribution, and obviously the Gini coefficient, has actually, revealed to that effect. And what I'd like to know is, how does trade impact income distribution?
Trade is not a remedy for unequal income distribution. I mean, if you trade, you have two effects. One effect is that the goods that come into the country become cheaper for the consumers. They don't have more money then, but they can buy more goods with the same money they have. So they stay poor as they are. If we talk about poverty, but still they can buy more things out of that from this money. Only indirectly I would address income distribution when I talk about the aspects of winners and losers. If you have trade that is rules-based trade and not corruption-based trade, then it enhances the income of the country in total. So Zambia in total becomes richer. But then, as I said before, you have some people that become richer, some people become poorer. So in the end, there's more money, but the income distribution actually becomes more unequal. So you need to balance this out, for example, by a social system. So a trade only works for the good of the complete population if you have a functioning social system. That would also not just mean you would just send some money from aid. We would also invest in healthcare, in education, and other things. But of course, you need to tax the people that become rich out of trade. Otherwise, it just makes things unequal and will not be a good thing.
You earlier talked about how trade can be able to help, to answer the universal challenge of poverty that is, of course, more prevalent, or rather which, Africa is one of those places where poverty is prevalent, and trade being one of those vehicles or avenues that can be used as an antidote. Doc, I'd like to find out from you. A lot of people may have brilliant ideas. A lot of people can begin, even at a very small level, to build structures that can grow into, trade, opportunities that can even impact nations. But the challenge that we find, for example, in a country like Zambia, is access to finance. So I would like to know, how did Europe, hand in hand, whilst trade policy, whilst the foundation was being laid to be able to create agreements that would improve the economic status of the continent through trade, what kind of financing models were being developed to be able to go hand in hand with building of an effective and efficient trade?
Private ones. So, as I said before, there was not the big plan how to develop Europe. About the Industrial Revolution happening in England about 300 years ago. And from that, there were private companies that grew, that also accumulated money and could invest out of this money. And you had banks that invested privately. you never had things like development banks or other things that brought about development in Europe. Now you have these things also for startups and others because everybody's doing it. But the reason for development in Europe and also in the US was not some state-led program, but private finance and private ideas. And I think that also is an important learning. Also from many years of development assistance that Europe and other Western countries did, that there was a belief in that if you come with some money and some good plans, it's going to work. It's not the point; it's the people in the countries. It's the Zambian entrepreneurs that with brilliant ideas that come about and implement these. And what you need for that is low bureaucracy, is a good investment climate, is low corruption and a clear and functioning rule of law based system where you can go before court if somebody doesn't pay his bills and you get your money at a certain time. That is important. So it's important that private investments and private activity can thrive. And then you need, of course, the good barriers out of it. And part of this is, of course, trade. That also trade is not blocked, but if you found a small company and you need to buy machines to produce things, that you can actually buy them from a foreign country easily and not need to bribe 15 people and fill out 150 pages of formulas to just get the machine, but to do it easily and quickly. Because that is, of course, cost that the entrepreneurs have to shoulder, and if it becomes too heavy and too much, they just don't do it.
Doc, the famous adage says when two elephants are fighting, it's the grass that suffers. And one would adduce, that some African countries may be the grass that suffers when you look at some trade wars that are going on the global scene involving two important and some of the biggest trade players, that is China and the United States of America. So I just wanted to find out, those countries that may be the grass when these two elephants are contending and sparring with each other, what can African countries do to be able to not only be that grass that will be trampled on, if at all it gets to that, but at the same time we become players that have a voice on the table?
I mean, it's the same question that also Europe asks itself, because also Europe is neither America nor China, and also we don't actually know how to behave there. Of course, the European Union is much closer to the US than to China, but still also we learned in the Trump years that it's not easy to be a partner of the US. In the end, what counts is that, speaking economically, that you have a well-functioning and profitable economy with which you produce things that China and the US need. That also maybe raw materials. So it's not that it needs to be the most highly developed engine in the world. It can be things that are just needed. And if you look at Zambia, I think there are lots of things under your ground that the US and China do need. And then it's important, and I would hope that Europe and Africa and also countries in Southern Asia and Latin America come together and make sure that we need something like a power in the middle, which would be multilateral organizations like the World Trade Organization, that make sure that even the big players like China or the US needs to play by the rules. In other words, there would be mechanisms that force them to do that. And the WTO had this power until recently. Now it was actually the US that kind of blocked the mechanism that would come in if something doesn't work. But I think the thing that can happen is that the smaller countries come together and make sure that multilateral institutions like the WTO or the United Nations work, because neither US nor China can ignore these big global institutions. But if you try alone to strike a deal with the US or with China, you'll always lose, because of course the big kids dictate the rules, how you play your football on the ground. So coming together, discuss together, and And I think at least that the European Union and Germany would be very happy to partner with African countries like Zambia and to make sure that the rules that have been defined already by the WTO that they work and that they hold on. So I think the doors are open for that.
Doc, as you may be aware, we recently ushered in a new administration in Zambia on the 12th of August. We had our general elections, and the United Party for National Development is currently the party in power. And they've made it very clear that their agenda is to be able to foster and propel economic growth through promotion of entrepreneurship. And as such, we've seen the creation of a ministry that is specifically, assigned to be able to look at the interests of, small enterprises. And earlier on, you mentioned, the importance of, laying ground and having in place, things such as a corrupt-free society, things such as upholding of the rule of law. And these are some of the things that this administration apparently is riding on. And building on what you said earlier, I just wanted to find out, Doc, as a country, are we on course, and what are some of the things that you would add to this new administration's approach to governance, trade, and entrepreneurship?
I think first of all, it's always a brilliant idea to look at the SMEs, because they are the backbone of every economy. And even if you look at the European economy or at the German economy, many people may know companies like Volkswagen or like Siemens or other big global enterprises, but 70% of the German GDP, or even more, and also of the exports, is generated by SMEs. So it's the backbone also of the German economy, and it's in every country. It's there where innovation takes place, where employment is generated, and also where poverty is reduced. Because if people start enterprises in their towns and villages, they create jobs and they create wealth locally. So it's always the best thing to do that. But from my experience, as I said, I lived in Kenya and also in the Congo for quite some time. The problem always is a bit similar to trade, so that many governments say, yes, we'll open our doors for trade, we also invest in SMEs, but then many people that are in government have different interests, because many of times their families own the biggest companies in the country, and so they are not interested in opening the barriers from trade, because then there would be competition coming in, which would not be good for the big companies. And also promoting small enterprises would, of course, bring competitors at the table for the companies. So in many cases, I don't know if it's the case in Zambia, I just talk about my experience in other countries. But in many cases, the things that are promised are not the ones that are actually implemented, because there are vested interests that block these things. So I would, of course, advise the Zambian government not to do that, and to understand that SMEs are the best thing that can happen to your economy. And if you want them, of course, you need to reduce bureaucracy for them. There's things like tax holidays. There's things like making sure that there's less formalities. Because if you have 5 employees and 2 of them are just working on the paperwork, that is, of course, not productive. If you have a big company, you can do that. So you have to have a less burden of bureaucracy on small companies. And then the most important thing, of course, as I mentioned earlier, is to be free of corruption and to have working courts and what would be generally called rule of law. I mean, that is something that you need to do in the end. Then let them work, because in the end, private enterprises thrive best if they're left alone. Of course, there should be rules. Of course, nobody does criminal things, but if that is made sure, the best thing for the economy is just let it work, and don't do too much planning. The entrepreneurs know very well what they want to do.
Doc, as we get to wrap up this conversation, I'd like to get your final thoughts on an important aspect that not only is very fundamental at country level, but is very also determinant at continental level. That is the issue of taxation. Doc, how important is this, and any lessons that we can draw from Europe, Doc, in 2 minutes, that we can be able to implement even at country level in Africa to ensure that trade becomes smooth?
if you want to trade become smooth, the same thing that I said before. Let the people do their things. I mean, in many cases there is distrust that people think we need to control the traders. Maybe they're criminals, maybe they trade drugs or other things. And of course, criminals do that, but criminals normally are not the majority of a population. So it's good to trust people, to trust traders, and to let them do their jobs and to make their job easy and not difficult. And if you want to block some things and want to regulate it, then you might need to deliver reasons for that. Sometimes there are good reasons to regulate trade. But then it's good to talk about it and to say, we do this because of problem ABC. And not just to tell stories and to say, it's dangerous for us, let's not do it. But of course, in many cases, the danger is not to actually, doesn't come with the traders, but with the people that are afraid of them. Sometimes it's, we call this suicide because you are afraid of death. Shouldn't do that. Just trust the people. In many cases, people do good things and people are good people. So let the good people do good things.
All right, Doc, thank you very much for joining me on BizWeek this evening to discuss the role of trade in national development. My guest has been Dr. Jan Senecki, Senior Advisor, International Economy and Trade at the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, based in Berlin, Germany. One of the most important, things emanating among the many from this conversation is the fact that indeed important structures of governance are very, very fundamental to building trade that can change the economic fortunes of Africa, both at individual country level and continental level. The name is Winston Mavoro. Thank you for watching and see you next time.